Welcome back to the course Life of Christ. Today we're in class 48. We're still in the events of the last week of Jesus' life, Holy Week. And today we want to begin in Matthew chapter 23, where Jesus is in the temple courts and he's talking with the Pharisees, but really giving them a tongue lashing, probably the worst in all of the Gospels. And we're going to read a long section that we've called the Woes of the Pharisees. Normally I show this video. It's a video based on the Gospel of Matthew. In fact, they film the whole Gospel of Matthew, and the dialogue and the description is the pure text of Matthew. There's no other dialogue besides that text. I highly recommend it. Excellent video. Normally I would show it, but I'm not sure about the copyright laws, so I'll just recommend it to you. Done by the Visual Bible Company. Let's begin reading in Matthew 23:1. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let enter those who are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing, but anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You blind fools! Which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing, but anyone who swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. You blind men! Which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, anyone who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And anyone who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And anyone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides! You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come on this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And I love the way this video does this chapter, because when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, of course he's angry, but then at the end of the story, whereas some might picture him as getting angrier and angrier as the story goes on and finally just rejecting the Pharisees completely, in the video, by the time Jesus gets to this last part about how often I would have gathered you, he's crying by that time. And I think that probably accurately reflects how Jesus felt. He was tremendously angry, but it was because of his love for the people and how they'd been treated by the Pharisees. And yet he loved the Pharisees too, and was sad that they wouldn't see the error of their ways and come to him and be saved. And so it's a great video. I highly recommend it. Now, I put up this picture here of Moses' seat in the Chorazin synagogue that we've already seen, talking about the Pharisees who seek the honor in the synagogues, and they sit in Moses' seat. And he says, now, you need to listen to what they say, because they're teaching you the law, and their teaching is correct, but don't do what they do, because they're not living it. And that's a pretty strong condemnation that probably could be leveled at most of us at some time or another, hopefully not very often. Now let's go to the 7 woes. I wanted to make sure that you could identify those. Pretty obvious, and we don't need a lot of explanation, but here they are again. The first one, he says, you shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces, verse 13. Number 2, you devour widows' houses and make lengthy prayers for show, verse 14, and parts of that are not in all the manuscripts, it says. Number 3, you travel over land and sea to make converts, then make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. Wow, a double accusation there, that they're a son of hell and that they make other people worse than them. That's verse 15. Number 4, you misunderstand the oaths and what they represent and how you do that, 16 through 22. Number 5, you neglect the important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness, verses 23 and 24. Number 6, you're clean outside, but inside full of greed and self-indulgence. You are beautiful on the outside, but inside full of everything unclean, 25 through 28. And then number 7, you pretend to honor the prophets, but dishonor them the same way your ancestors did. And so in this chapter, Christ calls the Pharisees hypocrites 6 times. Now think again, they're in the temple. This is the domain of the Pharisees. They're the religious leaders. They're respected. And Jesus confronts them in the place they're supposed to have all the authority and calls them hypocrites to their faces. And not only that, he calls them sons of hell. He calls them blind guides twice. He calls them foolish guides once. And he calls them snakes and a generation of vipers. So you can see, this is about Tuesday or Wednesday. You can see how this was rapidly accelerating. And Jesus, in some ways, was hastening their decision to go ahead and arrest him and kill him. So it's a pretty strong condemnation of the Pharisees by Jesus, Matthew 23. Now, as we continue on with the events of this week, there's the short episode that Mark tells us. Let's go over to Mark chapter 12, the very last part of the chapter. And Jesus evidently is sitting in the temple, and he's watching people put their offerings into different boxes that were there. Kind of interesting detail that these boxes evidently, where you put the money in, was shaped kind of like a trumpet. And you have the reference by Jesus earlier in the Gospels about, the Pharisees or those who give, and they announce their offering with trumpets. It's kind of an interesting overlap there with that detail. So verse 41, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." So again, it's about the heart. Jesus looks at percentages too, and he knows what everyone gives. This is an example of a widow's mite. It's the least valuable coin. And so this is all she had, just a couple of these coins. They're usually badly made and misshapen. You see the shape of this one. It's sometimes like a combination of the basest metals that you can get. And there's actually a lot of these that they found. And if you want, you can buy these on eBay. There's your 2 widow's mites and an olive wood box from Bethlehem. So there's always commercial opportunities, evidently, based on some of these stories. But I love the way that Jesus notices what this widow does. I think that's an important lesson, that no matter what we're doing or where we're doing it, that God notices what we're doing. It could be in the middle of the night. We could be up at 3 in the morning taking care of a sick child. We could be visiting someone in a deserted nursing home one afternoon. We could be doing anything, writing a letter to a missionary to encourage them. We could be taking a meal to a sick family. And Jesus and God notice all of that, and they will reward us for it. They see it, and they take it as something that's done for them. So I love that aspect of Jesus paying attention to the smallest things that people do. Then in the middle of this week then is when Judas decides that he is going to betray Jesus. And so he makes an arrangement with the leaders, the Sadducees, Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, and they decide to pay him 30 pieces of silver when he has a chance to deliver Jesus over to them. You know that story, but what you may not know is that there are Old Testament connections of several kinds with the story. Okay, so let's go back first of all to Zechariah at the end of the Old Testament, and we're going to go to chapter 11. And let's just read a little bit. It's something I never really noticed until I read Zechariah. It says, beginning in verse 4, "This is what the Lord my God says, shepherd the flock marked for slaughter," talking to Zechariah. "Their buyers slaughter them and go unpunished. Those who sell them say, 'Praise the Lord, I'm rich.' Their own shepherds do not spare them. For I will no longer have pity on the people of the land, declares the Lord. I will give everyone into the hands of their neighbors and their king. They will devastate the land, and I will not rescue anyone from their hands." And so he's talking about, again, the treatment that the false shepherds, the evil shepherds, are giving the flock. And so Zechariah, it seems, is talking in verse 7. "So I shepherded the flock marked for slaughter, particularly the oppressed of the flock," like Jesus. "Then I took 2 staffs and called one Favor and the other Union, and I shepherded the flock. In 1 month I got rid of the 3 shepherds, the false shepherds. The flock detested me," which is interesting because, normally the sheep follow the shepherds who provide for them. But in this case, you have the strange situation where the shepherd is taking care of them, especially the oppressed, and it says they detested him, which is really unsheep-like. Normally the sheep are faithful to and follow the one who cares for them. But it says the flock detested me, and I grew weary of them and said, I will not be your shepherd. Let the dying die and the perishing perish. Let those who are left eat one another's flesh. Then I took my staff called Favor and broke it, revoking the covenant I had made with all the nations. It was revoked on that day, and so the oppressed of the flock who were watching me knew it was the word of the Lord. I told them, if you think it best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they valued me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them to the potter at the house of the Lord. Okay, so the shepherd basically has been fired, okay, and he's got 30 pieces of silver for his work. and he threw them to the potter at the house of the Lord. Then I broke my second staff called Union, breaking the family bond between Judah and Israel. Then the Lord said to me, take again the equipment of a foolish shepherd, for I'm going to raise up a shepherd over the land who will not care for the lost, or seek the young, or heal the injured, or feed the healthy, but will eat the meat of the choice sheep, tearing off their hooves. Woe to the worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm be completely withered, his right eye totally blinded. And so again, you have this reference to the evil shepherds, which is interesting in the context of this last week, where Jesus has just rebuked the Pharisees for the 7 woes. And now in the context of Judas betraying Jesus and the false leaders making that arrangement with Judas, you have this connection with the false shepherds in Zechariah 11. Now, there's a couple of other things too. You probably know the story in Jeremiah 18 of God sending Jeremiah down to the potter's house to watch how the potter makes a clay jar. And he says, look, I am the potter and Israel is the jar. Can't I do with the jar just as I want? The potter shapes the pot just as he wants. He doesn't have to ask any permission. It's his work to do as he pleases. And so Jeremiah learns this lesson and then passes it on to the people of Israel. The interesting thing is that traditionally, the potter's house is down in the place called the Valley of Hinnom, the Hinnom Valley. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. Then in Jeremiah 19, verses 4 through 9, let's go over to that and read a little bit there. It says this: they have forsaken me, talking about Israel again. They have forsaken me and made this a place of foreign gods. They have burned incense in it to gods that neither they nor their ancestors nor the kings of Judah ever knew, and they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent. And this place that they're talking about is the Valley of Hinnom. Again, Ben Hinnom, they call it sometimes. In this place they have built the high places of Baal to burn their children in the fire as offerings to Baal, something I did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind. So beware, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the people will no longer call this place Topheth, or the Valley of Ben Hinnom, but the Valley of Slaughter. In this place I will ruin the plans of Judah and Jerusalem. I will make them fall by the sword before their enemies at the hands of those who want to kill them, and I will give their carcasses as food to the birds and the wild animals. I will devastate this city and make it an object of horror and scorn. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff because of its wounds. I will make them eat the flesh of their sons and daughters, and they will eat one another's flesh, because their enemies will press the siege so hard against them to destroy them. And again, the context of this slaughter and all these terrible things is the disrespect of God by the people, their disobedience to him, and all of this is going to occur in the Valley of Hinnom, Ben Hinnom. Okay. Now you wonder again, what's the connection here? Okay, let's go back and start connecting some things here. In Matthew 26, verses 14 through 16, is where we hear about Judas making the arrangement to betray Jesus. It's as if he's sick of his shepherd, like the flock that tested the shepherd in Zechariah, and so he sells him for 30 pieces of silver, the same price back in Zechariah 11. In Matthew 27, 3 through 5, when Judas finds out what's going to happen to Jesus, he realizes he's wronged an innocent man. And so he goes and he complains to the priests, and they don't care. They said, it's on your head. And so he takes the coins and he throws them into the temple, the house of the Lord, just like Jeremiah took the money, or the Zechariah took the money and threw the coins into the house of the Lord. It says it threw them to the potter at the house of the Lord. Okay. Verse 7 in Matthew 27 says the priest used the money that Judas gave back to buy the potter's field. And what is the potter's field? The potter's field is down in the Valley of Ben Hinnom. That's the area, the field of Akeldama, later on it's called. That's the same area of this Valley of Ben Hinnom where the potter's house was and where the potter's field was. And so in a sense, the money also went to the potter in that way because they bought the potter's field. And then we mentioned already that potter's field of Matthew 27:7 that they bought is probably the same area as the potter's house in Jeremiah 18, where Jeremiah goes for that object lesson. And that house is in the Hinnom Valley. And God, of course, is still the potter through all these stories. And then finally, according to Acts 1:18 and 19, when Judas is so overcome with remorse, he goes out and hangs himself. And then after a while, probably his body splits open and it falls into the valley. Well, that is in the valley of Ben Hinnom at the potter's field, the field of blood, or Akeldama. And so there's all these overlapping things. And I want to show you today, you have, go through here, sorry. You have the Hinnom Valley, which is down south of Jerusalem. This is the valley right along here. It meets up with the Kidron Valley running down the eastern side. And here's, of course, the Temple Mount. And so when Judas gives the coins back, he's up here in the temple. He throws the coins there, and then he goes all the way down here to the Hinnom Valley, and he hangs himself. Okay, and that's the story mentioned there in Matthew and also in Acts 1. So it's interesting to see how all these parts of the biblical stories converge. Zechariah, Jeremiah 18, Jeremiah 19, Matthew 27, and Acts 1, all of these converge around this location, and they all have themes in common. And today, if you go, you can see this valley. This is the Hinnom Valley, right, all of this area here. And there's even parts of it now that are not bad anymore. There's actually used for public entertainment and concerts. And in the place specifically where the potter's field was is now a monastery. And it remembers the events of Judas's life. So a sad story in many ways, but also very interesting to see how God pulls everything together. So some more stories from the last week of the life of Jesus. I hope this has been helpful to you. We'll see you next time.